Okay. All right. So we are in the Towers of the Law in the City of the Mystics, part two. And just to review quickly, really, the last couple sessions are in very brief terms. So the we have this expulsion of the Jews from Spain, a very traumatic event. It was to to them it was as traumatic as the Holocaust was for the generation or my grandparents' generation and my generation, my parents' generation, etc. This was a tremendously traumatic event, and it inspired a very, very powerful both creativity and messianism. Part of that was expressed in the mystical teachings, principally of Rabbi Isaac Luria, but his school and Tzfat and the whole sort of blossoming of that. But in at the same time, in the city of the mystics, there was a fantastic legal tradition. The single greatest legal work um, of the past 500, 600 years, maybe in certain ways even greater than Maimonides' work of the Mishnah Torah was produced there. That would be the works of Rabbi Yosef Karo that we discussed last week, that towers of the law in the city of the mystics. But it really goes beyond that. So there were two towers of the law. It wasn't just one tower. So one tower was Rabbi Yosef Karo and his prolific writing, his magnum opus, his absolutely stunning um, um, work of Jewish law. But tonight we have a second piece of that attempt. And last week we saw that the attempt was to unify the Jewish community with one set of law. That Yosef Karo's job was to not be pick and choose and have something that was random, really a catalog of all of the opinions of Jewish law and to come out with a final distillation, a sense of unity under the law. There is another attempt that is going to come about that is going to try and bring a certain kind of unity under the law, and that is the attempt to revive the Sanhedrin by Rabbi Yaakov Beirav. Now, just a brief sort of history of the Sanhedrin. Moses has to deal with this unruly group of Jews in the desert, and God says, I have a solution. I'm going to give you 70 elders plus you. That's going to make 71. That's going to be a grand high court. This high court has the right to legislate law, to adjudicate law, interpret the Torah. It becomes the final authority. It also becomes the body that will sanction a discretionary war. It is a body that has broad authority, and we should all have a certain lament that we don't have one today because it could settle a lot of issues in terms of Jewish law. Excuse me. It just came from teaching a student and I'm a little parched. So, anyhow, back to the Sanhedrin. So, the Sanhedrin exists as the body of Jewish law. It is formally fully authorized only when it is on in the temple, sitting in the chamber of hewn stone, and the Sanhedrin, with the destruction of the temple, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai moves them to Yavne and sort of gives them a sort of a renewed lease on life. And so let's just say this is somewhere around the year 67, 68 CE. And so for the next, let's give it 300 years, the Sanhedrin sort of loosely functions. It produces the works of the Talmud and of the Mishnah, maybe then a little bit of the works of the Talmud, but ultimately, um, probably through a decent bit of Christian anti-Semitism, it it ceases to exist. And so somewhere in the end of the fourth, maybe the beginning of the fifth century, we the Sanhedrin ceases to exist. Now, not only does the Sanhedrin cease to exist, but the kind of ordination, the fully authorized rabbinical ordination, also comes to sunset. Now, this kind of ordination has a couple of different factors which are which come along with that ordination, which do not exist today. One of which is the ability to administer fines and punishments, and the other is the ability to set the calendar. You need to be a full musmach. You need to have rabbinical ordination. You need to have been conferred as a rabbi who had the permission to teach, and this would have been a chain of transmission that goes all the way back to Sinai. And that disappeared. And so rabbis could not do things like administer certain kinds of punishments in court. They could not collect fines in court, and they certainly could not administer the death penalty. And as well, they could not set the Jewish calendar. And so before the sunset of these bodies of the smicha, we have a we have the a calendar which is set up, which is an intercalated calendar. The intercalated calendar means that mathematically we can program out the calendar as we do to this day, and we don't need a court to set the calendar. But comes along Rabbi Yaakov Beirav in the year 1538, and he says we need to reestablish this body of Jewish law. And he is going to come to this for multiple reasons, and I think scholars debate which one it is, and it could very well be both. So here's the first of the reasons that he may have wanted to reconstitute this smicha, this rabbinical ordination, um, and that is based on the writings of Maimonides. And Maimonides is the key to kicking this whole thing off, because now that we've lost this rabbinical ordination that goes down back to the time of Moses, now that we do not have a court that can do all sorts of things, now that we don't have a single court that can rule in terms of issues of Jewish law. And I'm going to give you today's issues, but back then there were their own issues. So we don't have agreement on where the Jewish international date line is. And there are still people to this day who will keep 2 days of Shabbos in Japan and 2 days of Shabbos in Hawaii because they're not sure which one of those, whether it's Friday Shabbos or is Shabbos Shabbos. And so they keep both of those days. In Japan, it's, I think, Shabbos and Sunday. In Hawaii, I think it's Friday and Shabbos. So these kinds of things are unsettled matters in Jewish law. Back in the days of the Mari Beirav, their challenges were well, if a field is owned by a non-Jew, is it subject to the laws of the sabbatical year or is it not subject to the laws of the sabbatical year? That would be an example of one of the raging debates which they were incapable of solving. Okay. Now, what does Maimonides say? Maimonides says, well, I think there might be a way to get this smicha back. And he writes, I'm of the opinion that if all the students and scholars agree to the appointment of one to the academy, that is as its head, and on condition that this takes place in the land of Israel, as I said earlier, then, that a person is so appointed he is ordained, samuch, and he may ordain others. So Maimonides says there must be a way to get this back. How am I going to get this back? Well, I'll tell you how I'm going to get this back. First of all, the idea of smicha, the idea of ordination belongs to the land of Israel. So if all the rabbis of the land of Israel get together and they agree, this is going to be our grand rabbi, and this grand rabbi is going to be the one that we're going to give ordination to, then that grand rabbi will be able to give others smicha. He will be able to give other people rabbinical ordination. And one by one, we will be able to get 71 rabbis, and we will have a Sanhedrin. Now, Maimonides also had another unique opinion. Maimonides was of the opinion that in order for the Messiah to come, you will need to reconstitute the court. Others would have said, no, the Messiah comes and then the court comes after the Messiah. No. Rambam says differently. Rambam says, I am of the opinion that the great court will be reconstituted before the appearance of the Messiah. This will be a sign of his coming. Yeah. Sorry, did someone have a question? Okay. So that will be the sign that the Mashiach is coming. The Mari Beirav is going to be of the opinion that, like his Kabbalistic counterparts, that the birth pangs of the Messiah were evident in the pain of the tragedy of the were in the pain of the tragedy of the uh, of this expulsion from Spain. I'm sorry, I'm toggling between two screens so I can see what's going next, and I didn't flip this to the text of the Rambam. So here again, you're seeing the text of the Rambam, where he's saying, "I am of the opinion that all the students and the scholars agree to the appointment of the one to the academy, that is at its head, on the condition that it takes place in the land of Israel, and by appointing the one grand rabbi, that's going to um, that's going to initiate this new court." And he's again, the second point that he makes is that the court has to come before Mashiach. And in fact, the court is a sign of Mashiach. And Rabbi Yaakov Beirav says, okay, just like my friends, the Kabbalists, the Ari, others are using mystical directions to bring about redemption because Messiah must be near. And because of all the travail and tragedy and hardship of the expulsion from Spain, there is going to be we've got to be close to the Messiah. So I'm going to do my part and um, um, going to bring about Mashiach through restoring the court. How long before okay, Ruth, you asked a good question in the chat. How long before the arrival of the Mashiach? So here, I'm going to take us forward 2 slides or 3. There was a belief that the year 5300, 1540, was going to be the year of the Mashiach. And so this is part of what is driving the Mari Beirav. We've got to reestablish the court. And so he's going to get the rabbis of Tzvat together. Now, this is one of the most prolific Jewish historians of all time, Heinrich Gretz. And Gretz writes, maybe summarizes this very important point, that every fresh column of smoke rising from the fires of the Inquisition in Spain and Portugal drove Marranos, singly or in groups, far away to the east, to their own higher convictions, allowed themselves to be overborne concerning the Inquisition. What he is referring to is they go to the east, Istanbul, Saloniki, Adrianople, to Ancona, to Egypt, Corfu,
Rhodes,
all of those places, right?
Rhodes.
And they in each of those places, singly or in groups, they are going to try to overcome the problems of the Inquisition. Now, one of the problems of the Inquisition was you had very significant rabbis. We've even discovered some of them in our course of study. Shlomo Molcho, we'll discover another this even tonight. These were people who had no choice. They had to go to church. They had to take mass. They had to genuflect. They had to do the things that Christians do to demonstrate that they are faithful Christians. In Portugal, in particular, it was not an expulsion, it was a forced conversion. And so the Portuguese Jews in particular had this stain upon them, and they were looking for formal penitence. Now, you and me, we would say, Mochalach, Mochalach, Mochalach. We forgive you. Well, who's to hold you guilty of these things, right? We're not holding you guilty of these things. The guilt here hangs around, the King Manuel. The guilt here hangs around Ferdinand and Isabella. The guilt here hangs around the neck of the Inquisition, right? But they still felt certain pangs of guilt, and they wanted to have properly administered lashes. One of the punishments of the Beit Din for some of their sins, let's say they ate pork. That would be one of those sins. They want to be properly disciplined for those sins, and that can only happen with a duly ordained court. This, by the way, is a picture of, there is a version of the ceremony that takes place by Ashkenazim on Yom Kippur,
Oh my
or
God.
Erev Yom Kippur. This we'll see a little bit more about this as we move forward. But there again, the two ideas that were animating this um, this court. Actually, I should say three. There are three ideas I think that are going to animate this court. One, Maimonides' suggestion that this is a necessary step to bring the Messiah, and when you see this, the Messiah is coming. Number two is we have conversos. We have this generation that survived forced conversion in Portugal, and they want penance. And the third thing is that once you have this court, they can speak for all Israel. They can unify the law. And so, just like Yosef Karo is trying to unify the law through a book that is going to bring the disparate laws of the Jewish people together into one place and sort of solidify a canonical law, this is going to create a court which is going to be the backbone and the pillar of the Jewish people. Okay, now as I mentioned already, 5300, that's the year of the Messiah. And another thing which is important is that Shlomo Molcho, if you remember him, he was this Portuguese Jew who who um, who had messianic um, aspirations. He had met up with David Haruveni, who was this. David Haruveni was a charlatan who said that he had the legions of the lost tribes waiting to be armed by the Holy Roman Emperor. And Shlomo Molcho had been in Tzvat. He had met Rabbi Yosef Karo. He had inspired him. He had inspired another rabbi of Tzvat, the author of L'Chadodi, Rabbi Shlomo Alkabetz. And so there was this messianic moment. Remember that Yosef Karo also wanted to die al Kiddush Hashem as sacrificing himself for the sake of the sanctity of God, like Shlomo Molcho had. So there's this messianism in the air. And all of this brings the Mari Beirav to an actual official attempt to initiate ordination. Now, this, as you can see from this 10-step diagram, 10-step chronological diagram, where the pro smicha camp and its efforts are listed in orange, and the anti smicha camps are in the brown, we will see that it was a ping pong match between the two of them. I'm gonna try and just describe the order of events in brief detail so that you kind of understand what's happening. The Sfat at this time is the big center of Torah learning. And so, just to put it in maybe strictly Canadian terms, you know, um, Tzvat would be like Toronto, right? Or maybe Lakewood, New Jersey. All of the great rabbis are in one of those cities, right? Let's take Lakewood. Tzfat is like Lakewood, New Jersey. That's where the center of Torah learning is. Jerusalem is like Washington, D.C. Yeah. Are there a couple of very sophisticated, interesting, smart, important rabbis in Washington, D.C.? Yes, there are. Does it compare to Lakewood, New Jersey? Does it compare to New York? Not at all. And so basically, Rabbi Yaakov Beirav says, well, all the important rabbis are in Tzfat. I'm going to gather all of the important rabbis of Tzfat, and they're going to confer smicha on me. And so he gets ordination in 1538. And then they decide, well, look, Jerusalem is an important city, even if most of the important rabbis aren't there. And he sends a messenger, Solomon Chazan. He brings the news to Jerusalem, and particularly he brings it to the person who is going to be the antagonist in our drama here, somebody who is named the Rabbi Levi ibn Chabib. And Levi ibn Chabib is going to get this news, and he is not going to be too happy about it. In the meantime, the very first Shabbat, probably according to one historian, there's a good chance that at that very first ordination, they ordained one rabbi. What rabbi did they ordain? They ordained Rabbi Yaakov Beirav. He was considered the greatest rabbi in Tzfat, although he probably wasn't the greatest rabbi in Tzfat. He was certainly the most venerated. He was the oldest, he was the head of the yeshiva, but he probably, in the end of the day, was not the greatest rabbi there. The greatest rabbi there was probably Rabbi Yosef Karo. But still, Rabbi Yosef Karo was a student of Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, and so he dutifully took his place in a more junior position. And he probably agreed to the fact that Rabbi Yaakov Beirav should be the head of the Sanhedrin in Jerusalem. And then Rabbi Yaakov Beirav visited all of the shuls of Tzfat, all of the important Jews. He would give a lecture in each one of the different ones. And if you've ever been to Tzfat, you can see there are many beautiful shuls. You know, there's the Alshich shul, there's the Abuhav shul, there's the Ari shul. There are all these different synagogues, different communities had their different synagogues, and he went to all of them and he preached there, and everybody said, wow, Smicha is coming, the Sanhedrin is returning, Messiah must be on its way. And the rabbis of Jerusalem, again, not so excited about this. And they may have sent a letter or two back to Rabbi Yaakov Beirav, telling him the reasons why they didn't think this really was worked. And maybe part of the reason it didn't work was because he didn't actually invite the rabbis of Jerusalem to the ordination. It says in Maimonides anyway that it has to be all the rabbis of the land of Israel. Rabbi Yaakov Beirav said, well, look, when it says all in Judaism, usually it means most. And since Tzfat is the most important center and all of the rabbis, they're agreed, so the Jerusalem rabbis don't really have the power to disagree. And Rabbi Levi ibn Chabib said, well, it says all should mean all. And I wasn't consulted. And so it really can't be all. And he also said, made arguments such as the Maimonides quotes this in his commentary on the Mishnah, but when the Maimonides puts together his code of Jewish law, he doesn't really quite include this. He says, it appears to me, but he doesn't really give it a full-throated endorsement. So maybe it doesn't really work. Maybe this isn't a proper channel. And there are a number of other technical challenges, one of which is that the critics said, look, if you guys really believe this, then you would have to tell the entire Jewish people to stop relying on the mathematical calendar that we all use, and you guys would have to set the calendar and send messengers every month. And you're not even prepared to do that. And you don't even think you're going to do that. And so since you're not going to take on the calendar, and since you even admit by your own argumentation that you're not taking on the calendar, you cannot be the real Sanhedrin. And the rabbis in Tzfat had their counter argument for that. I'm not going to get into they felt they didn't have to take that on, but still, there was a certain concession that maybe this isn't fully done. And so they do a second meeting. And they do a second meeting to ordain two more scholars so they can now have a Beit Din. And now one of the Jerusalem rabbis, Rabbi Moshe de Castro, he sends a letter to his teacher, Beirav. And that letter is a polite argumentation for why this is not going to work. The rabbis in Tzfat keep moving along, and they ordain several other scholars, including Rabbi Yosef Karo, Rabbi Moshe Ditrani, Rabbi Moshe Alchshich, and Rabbi Chaim Vital. Each one of these is in the yeshiva world, each one of these is a Hall of Fame batter. And so there are four outstanding scholars who have been ordained. They then send a formal court document, which is called the Maaseh Beit Din, to Jerusalem. And that document is even signed by none other than Rabbi Yosef Karo. Now, this is important because Rabbi Yosef Karo, even after all this story about the Sanhedrin, remains one of the most authoritative rabbis of all time. And now you have this court order that is signed by probably the greatest Talmid Chacham, the greatest rabbi of that generation, and he remains someone who is venerated to the highest degree. It is hard to find a rabbi even similarly venerated, and so his name is on that. Rabbi Yaakov Beirav responds to his student, and his response to his student is quite sharp. They published original certificate of ordination and its argumentation. And then Beirav and Habib insult each other in other responsa. And here, I want to share with you two parts of this, the barbs that go between them. Okay. This is from the Kuntras Hasmicha from Rabbi Levi ibn Habib. It's known as the Ralbach. By the way, this is a printing, I think from the it's a manuscript from the University of Manchester of the published. You can see up here it says Levi ibn Habib, and it talks here about Smichat Zakenim. Oh no, actually, I think this was auctioned on the Genazim website. That's where I found this. There's a reprint of it. But what does he say to his teacher? He says, one who is consecrated and ordained, meaning somebody who's holy and has this special ordination that you have now put all this energy into reviving for yourself, Mr. Mari Beirav, should have not only learning but also holiness also. And this was a reference to the fact that he insulted his student and he did not write things in a careful and a genteel tone, and which, by the way, happened in rabbinic circles all the time. But the argument is you do not reflect what I would imagine of the perfect rabbi, the chief rabbi of Israel needs to be an example. But Beirav's insults of he first of all insulted De Castro. He says his student should never disagree with his teacher like this. But Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv has a different scar on his record. Levi ibn Habib had been a converso in Portugal. And Beirav says, I have never changed my name in the midst of distress and despair. I kept always in the way of the Lord, which is a backhanded way of saying, you, Rabbi Levi ben Chaviv, you have no way, you cannot disagree with me. You know why you can't disagree with me? Because first of all, you used to have some Goyish name, and you used, Pablo or whatever Christian name you used when you were in Portugal, and you also practiced, Christianity in some way. You genuflected. You made the sign of the cross when you were in Portugal. Now it's not that Levi ben Habib doesn't admit that he did this, but you don't have to bring that up. The man has done tshuva. He's clearly a very pious rabbi. Why does that have to come up? So you see that this argument got quite personal. Ultimately, the rabbis of Jerusalem were successful in undermining this smicha. And so the rest of the Jewish world, and even to a certain extent, the rabbis themselves, did not feel it fully took. And so this attempt to revive the Sanhedrin was really a failure. Different scholars are going to understand it differently. Some of them are going to say, look, this was really too big an experiment to ever have really worked. And because of the half-hearted endorsement that Maimonides gave of the procedure himself, it couldn't work. Heinrich Gretz, who is more a secular atheist historian, is who also is a great champion of Jewish unity, says that no, it was really petty squabbles between Rabbi Yaakov Beirav and Rabbi Levi ibn Habib that put the end to this. Others are going to say, Jacob Katz is going to say, it was really it was a procedural failure. If you're going to do something this big, include all the important players at the beginning. You should have invited the Jerusalem rabbi should have been invited at the very beginning of the attempt. And that's why it failed. But what's fascinating to me is how you can see that this particular event of creating musmachim, of creating ordained rabbis, actually had some real legs to it. And so we're going to look now at five different expressions of Rabbi Yosef Karo to this event. Did he ever present this argument? I, Yosef Karo, I've got smicha, and you, Rabbi, Chaim Yankel from Aleppo, don't have smicha. So you have to listen to me. Or did he not make such arguments? So in the Shulchan Aruch, we learn this is at the end of Even HaEzer, at the end of the section on marriage and divorce. He's dealing with an issue where you could apply one of those punishments, one of those fines that the Torah allows, but it only allows for people who are smuchim, right? Onus and mafata, cases of where the biblically defined penalties for rape and seduction are judged with three judges. Vilvad shiyu smuchim. Oops, sorry. And it must be that they are smuchim, that they have proper smicha from the land of Israel going back to Moses, right? Smuchim be'eretz Yisrael. They're going to be ordained in the land of Israel. Va'idna she'ein smuchim. Nowadays, there's no smicha. This is written from the pen of somebody who was, at least in theory, got smicha. Menadin oto ad she'yifais et chavero. We do some form of cherem. We put them in a sort of an excommunication ban until they come to a negotiated settlement with their friend over or with the other. It has to be settled. That was actually quite a very powerful way the Jewish communities operated, and it solved a lot of problems. And he says, but the point that I want to make here is that Rabbi Yosef Karo was saying, there's no smicha today. He could have said, raise his hand. I got smicha. I'll give it to anybody who wants it. But he doesn't say that. He seems to reject it in his code of law. Now, similarly, in the Magid Mesharim, this is his spiritual diary. He says, Vayan ki masirat nefesh nafshecha al chazart ateret smicha, that which you undertook, you and the Maribei Rab undertook to restore the crown of smicha to its previous glory. Tizke liot musmach mikol chachmei Eretz Yisrael michachmei chutz laaretz vayadcha achzir hasmicha liyoshna. He says you ended up being ordained over all the wise men of Israel and Eretz Yisrael, and maybe smicha came back, but what is clear from this is that the Magid Mesharim is suggesting that it was an effort, but it was an effort in vain, because they didn't really revive the Sanhedrin. And here, in the laws of Yom Kippur, he writes as follows. He says, ואף על פי שאין לנו דיירים סמוכים כדי ללקות לפניהם, וגם אין כאן עדים שהתרו בו כדי לחייבו מלכות, מכל מקום כפרה מקצת הווה. He says, we can't do proper lashes. He's talking about the fact that on Erev Yom Kippur, Ashkenazic Jews have this custom that I showed you in the first slide, or not in the first slide, much earlier on, that they give lashes to each other on Erev Yom Kippur. By the way, you should know that this does happen between two Jews in our shul, and neither one of them is Ashkenazic, interestingly. But the Beit Yosef is mentioning this as an Ashkenazic custom of delivering lashes. And he says we don't have properly ordained judges to properly do this. And so this initiative, which was to a certain extent initiated in order to revive the smicha so that we could bring penance to these poor Moranos, it didn't work out. Yes, Annie.
So those malkotas, they're for kapara. What are they for?
Yes, exactly.
So it's an Ashkenazi minhag, but the Sfaradim, but the non-Ashkenazi are doing it.
I can't speak for other places on Erev Yom Kippur. For the past 22 years, I've only been one place on Erev Yom Kippur, and that's here. I don't want to mention the two Jews who do it without their names, but how should I put it? One is from east of Baghdad, and the other one is about as far west as you can get and still be Sephardic. So
before you fall into the ocean, Portugal. I guess.
Well, no, Morocco.
Morocco.
But yes, not far away. So yes.
I never heard of this minhag.
Well, you should come to shul on Erev Yom Kippur.
to get some lashes? I don't think so.
Well, or at least to see it done before it disappears.
Oh my God.
But yeah,
I don't,
it's a big. If you look for it online, you'll see that a lot. You'll see a lot of Hasidic Jews do this. It's very gentle. You know, it's like they take off their gartel and one bends down, and it's a very gentle sort of little tap. It's symbolic, right? But you, we need to crawl into the minds to a certain extent of these Jews who carried upon themselves tremendous guilt for having betrayed their faith.
right, right, right.
Now,
Well, the Muslim, there's certain sects in the Shia Muslims that do that. They hit themselves with straps of leather. They really think,
outside my area of expertise.
yeah, I know.
Anyway, back to Yosef Karo, because we're about to see. We really haven't even touched the beginning of interesting yet. Stay tuned. So Yosef Karo, in this particular text, I'm not going to read through the whole text, but basically he lets people know that everybody in the Jewish world turns to the Tzfat Beit Din because they are the great experts. But he does not say they turn to us because we have proper smicha. It is not an argument, it's an argument from expertise, not an argument from authorization. And so if he believed that they were more authorized than other courts because of their smicha, he would have put that into this letter. Now, on the other half of the ledger, there's an interesting point. This is a printing of the chuvot um, of Rabbi Yosef Karo, and it was printed by his children. And I don't know if you can see it well on this printing of the title page that was called the Shar page. It says Limaran Hagadol Harav Hamusmach, right? Yosef Karo. He calls him. They refer to him as the Musmach. Now this might have been there to sell more copies. This was done by his son, so maybe it has a little less point. But now we're going to investigate one interesting event, and we're going to say to ourselves, okay, Yosef Karo said we're the most expert Beit Din in the land, and they may even have had smicha, and part of their intention was we will be able to speak as the authoritative Jewish legal voice for the entire Jewish community. And so there was a very interesting episode that took place in the life of the Beit Yosef. That involved the entire Jewish world. But we need a little background for this. This is Paul the Fourth. He is one of the popes of the Counter-Reformation, and his predecessors, Clement the Third, Clement the Sixth, Paul the Third, number of other previous popes had allowed the Jews of Portugal to come to the Papal States and to be recognized as citizens, as Jewish citizens, even though they had been touched by the baptismal waters. Remember that these were Jews who had been baptized. They faked it. They said, on the outside we'll be Christians. We needed to save our skin, but on the inside we're still Jews. Now, according to the church, this is a big argument amongst the church. According to the church, a forced coercion is not really a kosher conversion, except the Inquisition did not accept that position of the church. That's what allowed the Inquisition to torture the conversos as not being real Christians. And so this dispute of law was such that in Spain and Portugal, the Inquisition raged because they said they are real Christians, and therefore they are subject to the Inquisition. Jews themselves, forever Jews, are not subject to the Inquisition, but conversos, they are. Now, the Papal State said, you can come back here. We want your trade. You guys are so good at business. We want the economic benefit. We will take the opposite opinion. We will say, you know what? Your conversions were all coerced. Your baptism wasn't real baptism because you didn't mean it. And so the first popes allow the Jews to move to places like Ancona, the Papal States, and oops, sorry. They moved to the Papal States, and they're considered kosher. Now Paul the Fourth reverses lots of things, and he reverses lots of things all over the place with respect to Jews. First of all, they have to wear the Jewish hat. The Jewish hat, it was, by the way, it was a green hat in the Papal States. You can see the hat right here. This is sort of a typical Jewish hat. You see it in a lot of different pieces of Jewish literature. Um, Women had to wear a green scarf. They started confiscating Jewish lands, and those Jews who owned lands had to sell it at a steep discount. Jewish doctors could not see Christian patients. They started forced labor. Jews had to build the walls of Rome, and we also had to build the house of the catechumens, which is pictured here. This is the original house of the catechumens in Rome. And this was a special place. This was a place to quote unquote welcome Jews and Muslims into the Papal States. The House of Catechumens was where the that boy from Bologna was taken when he was kidnapped from his family because he had been baptized. This was a place for the re-education of Jews, um, if you will. And um, the Jews are forced back into the ghetto. They confiscated copies of the Talmud. This was not a pleasant time to be Jewish. Um, but it was an even worse time to be formerly Jewish, because now the Inquisition comes to the port city of Ancona. And it comes by a secret order in Elul, August of 1555. So just let's remember that this is going to be 17 years after the Maribe Rav starts the revival of the Sanhedrin. It is 17 years after Rabbi Yosef Karo gets smicha, and this court, to a certain extent, of people who have ordination, is operating still in Tzfat. And so now we have a big problem because the Jews are taken into captivity in Ancona, or at least the conversos. Some of them are allowed to escape. Some of them are sold into slavery. Some of them are being tortured and their property is confiscated. And the Jews even started to take to call Pope Paul IV Haman, right? Uh, Not a term of endearment. Okay, so just a little bit of geography here. So this is what Italy looked like in the 15th and 16th centuries. You have the Kingdom of Naples, which is sort of the bottom part of. You have the Papal States, which go from Rome to the east coast of Italy, which has Ancona, which is a very important port city, or Urbino and Pesaro, which are also going to play interestingly into our city, into our discussion. These are all cities that have significant trade with the Ottoman Empire. Some of the rabbinic literature talks about hides that are transported from the Ottoman Empire. They are sold in Ancona. They are then the Jewish buyer in Ancona is meant to buy certain kind of Italian cloth, put it back on a ship, and sell it in the Ottoman Empire, right? This is an early free market economy, right? And the Jews are doing just fine because they all got cousins in all these places. And it's particularly the Portuguese Jews who have these contracts, and they're doing real well. But now a lot of those Portuguese Jews are sitting inside of a an inquisitional prison. And what happens is the Jews of a certain number of the Portuguese Jews from Ancona, go back a slide, they decide to travel to the Duke of Urbino and try and set up a competing port in Pesaro. And their cry to the rest of the Jewish world is, because of the horrible things that Haman HaRashad, Pope Paul IV is doing to us, you should all boycott Ancona. We Jews should be crippling Ancona and making it feel the pain of its sin, right? Now here are the arguments that go back and forth, and there are sort of two camps that form here. Um, the uh, the the camp which is which is against, is going to say, now it's the Jews who remain in Ancona who are advancing this argument. This is a complicated scenario. Because remember, you have Italian Jews who live in Ancona. They are not they're subject to anti-Semitism, but they're not subject to the Inquisition. And then you have Portuguese Jews. And the Portuguese Jews are subject to the Inquisition. And they're the ones who are suffering mightily. And they're the ones who ran away north to Pesaro, to the second port. The Jews of Ancona are saying, don't do this boycott. First of all, it will hurt us Jews in the Ancona and all the other Jews in the Papal States, because this Pope is mean and he's going to take it out on us even more. And you Turkish Jews who you're just worried about your financial losses. The reason you don't want to the reason you want to go to a different port is because you guys are afraid that if you show up in Ancona, you too are going to get thrown into the jails of the Inquisition, and you still want to keep up your trade. You just want a different port to do so. And the anti-Semitism in Urbino is also bad, because there was a story about the brother of the Duke of Urbino who went into a synagogue, ripped off the parchment of a Sefer Torah, wrapped it upon a pig, and hung it in the ducal palace. And so that's not usually, you don't usually get honored at the JCC sports dinner if you went into, the Shaare Zedek, took a Sefer Torah, wrapped it around the pig, and used it as a piece of performance art in your house. Another argument against the boycott. In the end, the Duke is going to cave to the Pope, and the Marranos will be in even worse shape, because now they'll have nowhere to go. And these escaped Marranos, they promised the Duke an increase in trade, but they're not going to be able to deliver it. And the only place that you can find tolerance is the Ottoman Empire. So Jews who came to Italy, shame on them. They should have learned from their bad experience in Portugal. So these are all the arguments against a boycott of Ancona. Now, there are arguments for the boycott of Ancona. The initiative was the invitation was the Duke's initiative. The Duke wants to stimulate trade, so he invited Jews. It happened all over Europe. It was a very, very normal thing. And everybody knew that these Portuguese Jews could make you a pretty penny. So it was his idea. And he knows that the Jews don't control the world. They just say that. And the argument again was, if we don't honor this, the only weapon we have against the Pope is the economic weapon. And if we don't flex our muscle, the Marranos are going to be in more trouble. The Duke has already undertaken the renovation of the port, so you shouldn't need not worry. The Turkish Jews, especially the Marranos, are being duplicitous because they know that they cannot send their ships to Ancona. This is just by the way, I want to show you the natural advantage. Ancona is, you can see it's a much better port than Pesaro just from the map. And here's pictures of the two ports. You can see the port of Ancona is really a very well-developed port, even to this day. And the one in Pesaro, which is on the left, is not really quite as good. And this was clearly the case. A lot of the merchants said that they tried to use Pesaro, and really that Pesaro was inferior for a number of reasons. And the boycott began to fall apart because both the port and the business market in Pesaro were underdeveloped. Right? You need a lot of things to make this work. You need to be a place to put the ships, and you need a group of you need the business pieces, the trade routes, the middlemen to make the market work. And apparently it just wasn't there. And this boycott was falling apart. The Portuguese Jews turned to this is from Mark Staperstein's article, Martyrs, Merchants, and Rabbis, Jewish Communal Conflict as Reflected in the Responsa on the Boycott of Ancona. Very interesting article, gives you lots of amazing detail. looks at how the rabbis investigate this whole story. But the reason I give you the source on that is because I'm not saying this is the most powerful figure in Ottoman Jewry, and it's a she. She is the most powerful person in Ottoman Jewry. She is a Portuguese Jew, and I think I'm going to dedicate the next session to her biography. Absolutely remarkable biography. She is the Warren Buffett of her day, and she is a Portuguese Marrano. She escapes the Inquisition more than once, and she then, as a Portuguese Marrano, and you can tell that there was this real solidarity between the various Marranos because they felt the pain. They understood viscerally what it was like to be under the thumb of these vicious Christians and the Inquisition. And they wanted desperately to make the Pope feel pain. And the way to get to the Pope was through his purse. And so she convenes a, a meeting of the rabbis to um, in the Ottoman Empire to solidify this idea of a siege or a boycott of Ancona. And so there's a lot of different figures here. On the bottom left, you have all of the Sephardic rabbis, the pure Sephardic rabbis, the rabbis of the congregations of people who left Spain and Portugal. And they're all for it. They don't need to be sold at all. They are the champions of this. They feel the pain. They know exactly what it is. There's the Ashkenazic rabbis who really don't care because they have very little skin in the game, but they're also convinced to support it. Partially because Dona Gracia Mendes and her nephew support their yeshivot, and they say, look, you know what? You don't want to support us? That's fine. But we also don't have to support your yeshiva. At which point they said, okay, we're behind it. Then they schlepped in the Romaniot rabbis. The Romaniot rabbis are really the rabbis of the Byzantine Empire. Those are Greece, Russia, those areas which are really, they're like, we have no skin in the game. This is not where we do business. We don't send, our people don't send ships over there. Sure, and they get forced into it. And then you have one rabbi who is part of the he represents the voice of the non-Sephardic um, um, when I say non-Sephardic, I mean non-descended from Spain communities in Istanbul or Constantinople, Rabbi Yoshua Sansino. And he leads the opposition. And he basically says to Dona Gracia, I can't support this. You've coerced the Romaniot rabbis, you've twisted the arms of the Ashkenazic rabbis, but really what's going on is the economics of the whole picture just wouldn't stack up. Um, and so even with the 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 strong economic support of and the arm twisting of the most powerful woman in all of the Ottoman Empire, this siege doesn't work. But the reason the story is included with us tonight is because they also sent the question to the Beit Din in Tzfat. And the Beit Din in Tzfat said, yes, we should stand behind the we should stand behind this siege. Now, it should be that if you are the one big recognized Beit Din, if you are the most learned rabbis, and everybody agrees that you are the most learned rabbis and you're the rabbis who are ordained, that nobody else has that ordination, and they should listen to you. But Rabbi Yoshua Sansino felt no such compulsion. He didn't feel that he needed to give in to the rabbis, that they had no special understanding. And I should note the arguments that I presented before in this slide are all represent the investigations that each of the rabbis did to try and figure out what was really going on the ground, because it was really hard to figure out who was really anti-Semitic, and their arguments back and forth. And in Saperstein's article, he he details all of the confusion about just practical facts that were going on there and trying to figure out, was the Duke anti-Semitic? Was he not anti-Semitic? Was he going to give up on the Jews? When did he start building the port? Who extended the invitation? All these different kinds of questions, which are just very practical ones. And so this court in Tzfat had no power to give special proclamations in this fight. And I think one of the things that you see, one of the interesting outcomes here is, on the same side, you have the single most powerful philanthropist in the Jewish community, as well as the most learned rabbis. And still, they couldn't get it to work. They couldn't affect this boycott. And Rabbi Yoshua Sansino writes that um, um, oh, sorry. So he writes, such as never occurred before, for the 10 congregations here in Constantinople had never divided among themselves on a matter of such great importance. That this was a really important matter, and the Jewish community itself was split. But and this slide is a little bit out of order, and I'm sorry about this. Should have maybe put this a little bit earlier. Dona Gracia Mendes was of such influence. She was able to convince Suleiman the Magnificent, the Sultan, to demand from the Pope a that the Turkish citizens who had been imprisoned, because they too were conversos. So he writes to the Pope, certain subjects and tributaries of ours have gone to Ancona. Their goods and property have been seized at your command. This seizure has resulted in the loss by our treasury of the amount of 400,000 ducats, over and above the damage caused to our subject, who have not been ruined and cannot meet their obligations, who have been ruined, cannot meet their obligations to our said treasury. We therefore request your holiness that you will be pleased to set free our above mentioned subjects. By doing so, you will give occasion to us to treat in a friendly fashion your subjects. Meaning, if you want, we can hurt some Christians. At this time, the Ottomans are moving their way up to Budapest, right? They are they have significant holdings in the Balkans. The Ottomans threaten the Christians, and they listen. But what's important to us is this woman, Dona Gracia Mendes, is able to have the ear of the Sultan. And yet, at the end of it, Rabbi Joshua Sansino writes the following, and this is the real coda on our story, at least this week's story, that because there is no king of the Jewish people, it is impossible to achieve uniformity of opinion and to compel the merchants to carry out the condition which the refugees made with him. Meaning, the refugees from Ancona said to the Duke, we'll declare a siege and you'll get a lot of good business. But he put Yoshua Sansino, this is really probably Sansino's words, but he puts them into the mouth of the Duke. And he says, there's no king of the Jewish people. We don't have the central authority to unify, to be able to have this kind of powerful effect. Now, Saperstein thinks that this is a dig at Dona Gracia Mendes, which basically says you might be a rich lady, but let's not get it out of control here. You're not the queen of the Jewish people. But at the same time, he could have simply said there's no Beit Din, there's no Sanhedrin of the Jewish people, right? This attempt to create a single Jewish voice out of the Sanhedrin in this very important moment does not come about. Their voice is barely heard in the argument. And I would say, to a certain extent, the literary work of Rabbi Yosef Karo has had a far, far greater impact on unifying the law and opinion and practice of the Jewish people than the reestablishment of the Sanhedrin ever has. And so, wow, okay, I'm about 2 minutes over. But to me, this is a fascinating, fascinating story. And it is also, it's a fascinating sort of picture of the Jewish people fighting back against the cruelty of the Catholic Church, trying to use their economic weapons, and they just simply cannot organize it enough. The Chuvot going back and forth talk about the greed of the Turkish subjects who don't want to divert their profits. Talks about, do we have to force other people into a loss for this situation? They talk about what can we compel each other to do as a community. It's really a fascinating piece, but I probably cannot get into the weeds too much in this. Anyway, um, so that's the that we'll go questions, comments, sorts